Good morning and welcome to another stream by the ACT Chess Association of their online events, which are currently being held on chess.com, organised by the ACT Chess Association to replace the events that weren't being held in Canberra while social distancing and lockdown restrictions were in effect. Having said that, as I reported in yesterday's stream, uh, changes in the regulations on lockdowns have occurred, and it means that both the Tuggeranong Chess Club at the moment and the Canberra Chess Club are back meeting on Monday and Thursday nights respectively. So we're cutting back on tournaments, but at the moment the two events that are running is the Wednesday night Rapid, which will probably keep running, and the Thursday night August Standard event, which is up to round 4. After we run this one, this will probably be the last one because it does clash with the Canberra Chess Club, and we don't want to take people away from playing real chess. And in fact, the fact that Canberra Chess Club went back last night meant that there were a few players missing. Excuse me, missing from last night's online event simply because they were playing face-to-face chess. We've had 4 rounds, and after 4 rounds, Sully Avancible is now well out in the lead, 4 out of 4, ahead of 3 players tucked in behind: Victor Bragan, Lachlan Ho, and Tim Pearce, who are all on 3 points. Last night's event also had something slightly unusual, which was at some point during the tournament, after about an hour, there was a system server reboot on chess.com. Now, normally that's pretty catastrophic if you're in the middle of a long time control game, because they don't keep state, and once you've lost the game, you've lost the game. However, if you kind of know your way around chess.com, you can salvage something from that, and fortunately I was able to do that for them. It is possible to take a cut and paste of the current position in Fen, and then when you restart the game, it is possible, if you know the match command, to put that Fen string back in and it'll start the game from that position. The 2 drawbacks are, one, you've got to then reset the clocks to match the times that the players had, and secondly, the game itself, you've lost the first half of the game essentially. You can't retrieve the moves from chess.com. You can only retrieve the game from the starting position that you've put in. And weirdly enough, it describes the game as an odds game, which kind of makes sense because one side's probably already material up. So the problem that caused us was that I have less games to choose from. Today, for example, the top board clash between Matt Radicic and Sully Avancible would have been nice, but I've lost most of the moves on that one, and in fact there were a few other games as well. So the game I'm choosing instead is played between Lachlan Smart and Hunter Sanchez, and it turned out to be a pretty good win for Lachlan, but I was watching it and there was a nice attack building up. So let's just get started and have a look at what really happened. So Lachlan Smart is white, Hunter Sanchez is black. E4, C5, knight F3, D6, D4, takes and takes, knight F6, knight C3. So lots of Sicilian theory here, essentially, and knight BD7 was played. There's a lot of moves that can be played here. I'm just going to flick an E5 here because one of the early ideas behind the Sicilian years ago was to play something like E5 to drive the knight away from the center, but various responses, including playing the knight to B5 check, knight to B5 plus bishop to B5 check were irritating for black. So that's when theory sort of headed across to the knight off. But if we play E5 here, bishop B5 check, for example, knight BD7, knight F5 is one idea here, and the D6 pawn is under attack. But I'm not going to go into the theory too much here, not yet, because there's thousands of games that have been played here. So knight BD7 instead, bishop E2, E6, F4 often turns up in this position. The idea is to play F5, while in this game G4, G5 got played, bishop E7, castles and castles. I was a little bit surprised that white chose to castle kingside and play G4, which is coming, instead of looking at queenside castling, which is the other way of playing it. But looking through my database of games, this position actually has been played quite a lot. King H1 to prepare for G4, pawn to A6, and G4. So there's been a number of games that have already reached this position. Bishop F3 can be played here, Queen E1 can be played here, but the one thing they've got in common is actually white wins lots of them. So this position is considered favourable for white, at least based on the numbers. So G4 was played. And black kind of went wrong straight away with an understandable but erroneous h6. And the problem with a move like h6 is it creates a little bit of weakness on the king side, because when the pawn goes to g5, which it's going to go to now, black really doesn't have a choice about retreating the knight. It has to take first, which opens up the king side somewhat. If the pawn's back on h6, the knight can just go straight back to e8 after g5, and white has a bit more work to do to try and open up the king side position. The best choice here was knight e5, knight c5, because it gives the knight an escape route to d7 after g5, and also the e-pawn's under attack. And we might play bishop f3 here, and d5 is quite a good move because you want to fight back in the center. And after e5, you've even got now knight fe4, because the knight on c5 is supporting, and we take, bishop d2, queen c7, queen e2, and rook d8, and it's kind of pretty equal, this position. Black's actually doing quite a good job of defending. And really importantly, the one thing it does demonstrate, this sort of line, even though it's unlikely to have occurred, is that the best way to meet an attack on the king side, or the queen side, the matter, is to fight back in the center initially, because you're actually forcing white to keep coming back to the center to defend things, rather than trying to just checkmate you on the king side. So h6 is the problem, and instructively g5 is the right move here now. You want to take advantage of the fact that h6 has been played. Because if knight goes back straight away, as I said, black really should take, because if takes and takes king here, rook check, and it turns out that the white king is a lot safer than the black king, and the black pieces are going to come through with a very strong attack. So taking and taking, and now knight e8 needed to be played here. It looks ugly, but it is the right move, because after g6, you can play knight e5. And the idea behind knight e5 is now that the bishop is protecting the e6 pawn, because white got a big advantage by taking on f7 in a different line with rook takes, knight takes. But now knight takes e6 can't be played because the bishop's protecting. You play bishop c4 to gang up on it, but knight goes to c7 to defend. Okay, and queen h5 is good for white, and white has a plus here, but it's not as massive as what occurred in the game. Instead, once the knight went to h7, white struck straight away. g6 is an excellent move. Because what do? There's a few choices here. You can take on here, but that runs straight into a move like this, and you've just got a good position, and other bad things are going to happen because the queen has got some issues. Even if you go take on f1, you've still got some problems. Knight back to f6 was played. Knight g5 is the other alternative, but in fact white gets a really good position out of this one. G takes f7, rook takes, king takes to protect the e pawn, because if you take with the knight takes e6 straight away. But even after this, you've got bishop g5, bishop takes g5, and then knight takes e6 can still be played, forking queen and bishop for the moment, as well as you're just a pawn up, because if king takes e6, then queen d5. And it's just instructive to look at how this attack plays out. King back to e7, you just drop the bishop with check. So king goes to f6, queen to f5, king has to go back to e7, but then you get knight d5, check here, and you're getting mated basically. King to e8, and the bishop goes to h5, g6, bishop takes g6, mate. A nice forcing mate, but it's one of those things that often turns up in things like Puzzle Rush, where you can, all the way back to a position like this, white to play and win, and you play knight takes e6, and away you go with the king hunt. So the knight went back, but now after g takes f7, rook takes f7, the e6 pawn is undefended, so the knight just went bang and took on e6. And so the queen's under attack, went to b6, and knight to g5 is another nice move, because you're forcing the rook to go back or giving up the exchange. Unfortunately for what I'm showing you today, black decided to hang on to as much material as possible, which kind of makes the game interesting because it's much more direct in terms of heading towards mate. Often you'll get a situation where one side will give up material just to hang on, and the game might drag out for another 20 moves, but white would still be winning. But it is less interesting to broadcast. So the rook goes back, and we play bishop c4 check. King to h8, of course. And then there's a number of moves here that can continue the attack. Queen e1's a nice choice. The other move that I would have been considering was knight d5, hoping for the blunder of knight takes d5, queen h5, and you're mating, or have mated. Mating, I should say, with the king to g8, queen to h7, checkmate. So knight takes d5. You don't take on d5. It is a blunder. But if the queen, say, goes back to d8, then you've just got knight takes f6. And again, this is another forcing sequence where lots of captures and checks take place. So there are, in theory, checks and captures make it easy to calculate. In practice, it's still quite hard. Knight takes f6, knight takes f6 to guard h5, and you just play the rook sack. Rook takes, and now you get queen h5. Check, rook h6 is the only move, and then knight f7, king up to h7, and then bishop takes h6. And white is just winning here. You've just basically, you're up a piece, you're threatening the queen, the king's out in the open, you know, what more can you ask for? Queen e1's just as good. The idea, of course, is just to get in something like queen h4 check and mate to follow. So knight goes to h5 to stop that from happening. Queen h4 could have been played, but only if you can spot, which I think is a really hard move to spot in this position, rook f7. And then, again, there's another sequence. Check, capture, 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 capture. Knight df6 because the threat was queen h6 mate. Queen to h6 anyway. Knight to h7, and then bishop takes here. And, white's up 2 pawns. King's still exposed. Black can't quite organise counterplay in time, at least as far as I can see. And so white is winning this one. But now knight d5 drops the queen back to d8, of course. Knight f7 here. Rook takes, rook takes. And white is actually completely winning this position. But it's still worth looking at how white does eventually win this position, because there's a difference between winning and won. And there are a lot of games where I've seen players go, oh, I'm just totally winning, and I mucked it up in time trouble, or I missed a move, or whatever. So bishop f6 not only puts the bishop on a safer square, it was hanging on e7, but also now the rook, for the moment, doesn't have any safe squares. And if black could get a move or two up and running, like knight e5, to attack the rook and the bishop at the same time, black might think that they're doing okay. But queen e2 is a nice move. It's just attacking the knight. And after g6, we've got bishop h6 here. Queen went to g8 to try and defend this half of the board. And now white played a very nice move. Understanding that the knight on d7 is performing a really important job of protecting the bishop on f6, which is doing a really important job of keeping the white pieces out of certain squares. White sacked the exchange on d7. Could have played knight takes f6 here, the same idea. Knight takes, queen to f3, knight back to h5, but then rook f8 just picks up the queen, because queen's pinned, and if you take with the knight, the bishop that's been hiding away there on c4 just jumps in and captures as well. Don't like that. Play rook takes d7 as another move, because after bishop takes c7, knight takes f6. Okay, and again the queen is under attack. So knight takes f6 falls to bishop g8. So the queen goes to d8 instead. But then you've got knight takes h5, g takes h5, queen takes h5, and suddenly bishop g5 is being threatened, or bishop f8, which I think is actually checkmate. That's always a nice one. Is also being threatened. So the queen goes to e7, and white had a number of good winning moves in this position, all that tended to pay off. Bishop f6 was probably the right one, and the reason being bishop g5, not bishop f6. After bishop g5, queen h7 to block, bishop f6 was checkmate there. So in the end, a good win for Lachlan Smart. If you're looking at places to improve, especially for black, h6 was a mistake here, because it just let white's attack really gain steam. Don't play moves like that unless you absolutely have to. You're just opening up your king side there, and various nice moves all the way through here. Knight d5 in this position is worth looking at for the tactics, but rook takes d7 just sets up a nice finish as well. So Lachlan was pretty sharp in this game, found the right moves at the right time. Hunter was under pressure once g4 hit the board and wasn't able to defend. By the way, positions like this, whenever I've coached juniors, and it's going back 20, 25 years, I've always told them to stay away from positions like this as black, mainly because I've always seen juniors, when they start out, are much better at attacking and defending, and defending positions like this takes a lot of work. And it's probably better to master how to bash these positions rather than defend these positions first. And sure, once you bash them a few times and suddenly your opponents are finding ways of defending, then copy those if you want to play these positions defensively. But if you're going to give white space and you're going to give white active pawns, and you're going to huddle your pieces on the dark side of the board, be prepared for some severe bashings and losses early on in your chess career. So that was from last night's ACTCA standard event, which I organise on behalf of the ACT Chess Association. My name is Sean Press. I run these events and a few other events here in Canberra. Street chess on Saturdays. If you're interested, come on down. Tomorrow might be particularly cold. Might even be snowing. That's the weather forecast. Anyway, I do the summaries of these events normally the day after. So at the moment, we're only running 2 events on Wednesday night and Thursday night. So the summaries normally appear Thursday and Friday. So my next tournament summary is likely to be next Thursday morning around this time. So until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.